Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister at the University of Toledo.
When we talk about spirituality these days, I think we like to see it in a broader way, to see that indeed we are embodied spirits, that there's a spiritual dimension to the whole of our lives, to all of our activities. The word spiritual points us to the fact that we humans have the capacity to transcend or go beyond the ordinary. We have the capacity of finding the extraordinary right within the ordinary things of life.
Joining Father Bacik in today's Reflections is Sister Joyce Lehman, Director of Religious Education at St. Thomas More University Parish in Bowling Green, Ohio. Today's Reflections focuses on the topic of spirituality and youth ministry. Here's Father Bacik.
Joyce, you spend a lot of your time dealing with young people over the years. You've had various types of youth ministry, haven't you?
Yes.
Why don't you remind me of those a bit? I've forgotten a bit of that history.
I've been a high school teacher. I have worked in religious education specifically with youth in parishes. I've worked on a diocesan level as a youth ministry consultant, and probably the one that really put me in touch with youth was being the dean of residence, which was like full-time mother to high school girls at a boarding school.
Really, and then you've worked with collegians as well.
Yes, right.
In your job as a campus
yourself.
minister. You are well qualified to talk on this topic of youth ministry. Why don't we center in on one aspect of all of that and talk a bit about spirituality. Spirituality and youth ministry will entitle this talk.
Okay,
or
sounds
this conversation. When we start to talk about spirituality, I think right away that could turn a lot of young people off and older people as well, the adult generation, because it sounds so esoteric. Talk about the spiritual life sounds like something you would speak to nuns or priests or ministers or rabbis about. That this has to do with something special and apart from ordinary life. It brings to mind images of going off and reading one's Bible, or spending a lot of time on one's knees, or doing special ascetical practices, or spending a lot of time at worship and so on. And surely that's part of the spiritual life, those explicit things of going to Mass and celebrating the Lord's Supper and reading the Scriptures, vital part of it. But when we talk about spirituality these days, I think we like to see it in a broader way, to see that indeed we are embodied spirits, that there's a spiritual dimension to the whole of our lives, to all of our activities. The word spiritual points us to the fact that we humans have the capacity to transcend or go beyond the ordinary. We have the capacity of finding the extraordinary right within the ordinary things of life. We're the people who, when we run up against the limits in life, want to surpass them. Our heart is restless and always is moving beyond what we currently have. We want to know more and experience more love in our life. So there's that outgoing character, that drive, that push from within, that allurement we find in life. That's part of what it means to be a spiritual person. And I think the other part of being a spiritual person is we have the capacity to withdraw from life, to step back and make judgments about what is going on. We have the ability to return to in ourselves and to be quiet and to meet our God within our own heart. We have the opportunity of stepping back and seeing things in a different perspective. That we know these moments when we're quiet, when we can shut off the TV and the radio and just be alone with ourselves. A lot of times we learn more about who we are that way. But we have that power to withdraw into ourselves, to return to ourselves, and where we know our own uniqueness at that point, where we know that when we're really sad, that we're the only ones who really know exactly what that's about. Where we know our strengths and our weaknesses from inside in a way that no one else can know them. So when I'm talking about the spiritual life, I'm not talking just about reading one's Bible, although that's an important part of it, but I'm talking about our whole effort to gather our forces, to deal with the restless heart that's within us, to try to deal with this ability to step back and to analyze. It is, in my mind, a quest for some sort of integration in the midst of all of the tugs and pulls that we know. It's an attempt to find some depth in the midst of all of the superficial living that can go on for us. It's an attempt to find something that we're really committed to in the midst of having the blahs or wondering if it's all worthwhile or not. So spirituality, in my mind, is a deeper and richer kind of thing. And that, when we start to talk to young people like that, it seems to me that they're bound to be interested in it in a way. It's because it's got to do with life. That phrase from Irenaeus comes to my mind. The glory of God is the human person fully alive. And maybe if we start talking to young people like that, we could make this question of spirituality more interesting.
I think, too, to reinforce one of those first points, this isn't something reserved for someone who has the luxury of a 30-day retreat to withdraw and reflect, or someone who is faced with a major crisis in which they find themselves drawn forth to overcome it. I think it happens in the very daily kinds of things. It's the housewife with the dishes at the sink where the kids are in the other room for a moment, and she has just a peaceful moment, maybe only 30 seconds to draw within and reflect. Or it can be the teen who happens at a movie to just kind of be caught by something and finds themselves thinking seriously about that. Doesn't have to take place somewhere else outside of our very daily, normal type of life, but it is a part of where we're at in the present moment.
And it would seem important, would it not, Joyce, to cultivate those kinds of moments, therefore, to celebrate them, to latch on to them, to point out their importance. I like the kinds of examples you use because they're very realistic. And the man driving to work in the car might turn the radio off and just spend a minute in gratitude for his family, or asking God to help him to heal the wounds that occurred in the family life just recently. One could imagine that happening in very ordinary kinds of settings, and maybe in fleeting ways.
It's so important, I think, to recognize them when they happen and to trust that that really is a deepening of our own spiritual lives.
I guess, Joyce, if we're going to talk to youth effectively about spirituality, we have to have it rooted in our own lives and in the adult world, the larger community. So we're not going to really pass on something to young people that we ourselves don't have. I think that in the past, when I've seen adults, for example, studying their faith and praying together, and where their youngsters see that as they're growing up, that seems to me to be such a tremendous witness. It speaks so much more than a sermon you give to the kid, like, I want you to get to church this week, or I want you to shape up and do something right. If the young people see the adult community interested in learning, then they think, geez, that must be worthwhile. If they go to church with their parents and they walk out and the parents, the husband and wife, are getting along better and seem to be more kind or easygoing or relaxed at that time or more receptive, then they get the point that worship must really be something good. If they go to church and they see people enthusiastic about the greeting of peace, or if they see people paying attention to the homily or singing the songs or saying the prayers, then they get the impression that, well, this is worthwhile. This is something I ought to get in on. So if we're going to talk spirituality, it seems like the community aspect of it will be really important.
I think that sense of modeling has always been a strong one for me, that youth need models of what we're calling them to become. I think that was brought home. They articulate this at times, that they need them. I was asked to give a talk as a part of a high school religion class, or a series of classes where the parish they would ask the students to come in on 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon, and not trusting their own sense of their faith and their ability to transmit that faith or to share that faith, they ask outside speakers to come in. After it was all over and done with, about 3 hours worth of attempting to give something to about 40 young people, one of the girls came up to me afterwards and said, she appreciated, the effort that I had given, but she said, I'd like to know where my parents are. I think they should have heard this too. We're asked to come on Sunday afternoons and give up our Sunday afternoons where our parents can be home watching the football game or whatever, and they're not giving this time up to really become better Christians like we're supposed to be. Mm-hmm. So she had caught that sense that she needed to see her parents, other adults in the parish, tend to their own spirituality, their own religion. as they were being asked to do.
That's really a telling example,
Yes.
isn't it? It's the kind of thing that you hear a lot in different ways from young people. You know, the Total Family program that you have been in charge of for a number of years tries to address some of these issues, doesn't it? It tries
Yes.
to make sure that when the people come for education, that it's not just the parents shipping the kids off and saying, you go to classes, but the parents have to come themselves. And that a part of it is that they have to go to class and be educated and to learn something about their heritage at the very same time that the young people are doing it. In fact, they try to take up the same theme or the same questions according to their own interests and abilities, matching their age and so on. So that seems to be a very wise thing. And it also, I think, expands a bit in that Total Family program when there's seen to be worship as part of it. And the community leaders have to be involved in that as well. And that, again, I think speaks to the young people. But it's harder for them to say, well, I don't want to go there when the parents are already going. It's just something that the family does. And again, I think it probably speaks louder than all the individual words or sermons could ever do.
And having a common topic also gives them some common experience to talk about afterwards. There's a lead-in to a discussion that might not have happened otherwise, to talk about baptism or initiation, even with the little preschoolers, where they may have experienced some of this or come together as a family and see the baby baptized, which we did as a communal celebration, as a part of that study of baptism. They possibly would never have talked about that otherwise, but this is provides them with a lead-in to talk about a little bit among themselves as a family.
Yeah. And one would hope then when they're at the dinner table sometime, they would bring up the topic of the previous week's sessions,
Yes.
and that it would prompt some questions among the young people. I know that was one of the major thrusts of the program, was to initiate that kind of conversation, to get people talking seriously. And it's interesting, isn't it, that many people find that very difficult.
Yes.
Many parents find it very hard to talk about those deeper matters. And very often it isn't that they don't feel them and don't sense the importance of them or don't really think about them in their own mind. It's just that they haven't been trained to articulate them. They've never had that opportunity. We've not done well in the churches, I don't think, in helping people to trust their own experience and to be able to share that with the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
We really have to improve in that if we're going to engage the young people in this spiritual quest in a deeper way. I think very often that there's a hunger for that. You and I in the active ministry know that adults will come to us and want to talk about serious matters and often complain that they can't talk about them with their spouse or with their circle of friends or their social group, that it's just not an in thing, that they would be embarrassed to do it there. And yet the hunger is there, and so they search us out. And one would hope that in normal settings that could happen more.
We've privatized religion a lot, and I think working with one of the programs that we have going at St. Tom's right now, which is an ecumenical one, we call it Pure Ministry Enablement. Part of what we wanted to do at the very beginning in talking about training or enabling peer ministers is to help them articulate their own faith and their own faith journey. And I think that has been such a revealing thing for me. That was the most powerful part of the training that we did with these young people, was enable them and give them a supportive community in which they could talk about their faith journey, some of the struggles they experience, their doubts. They're really searchers on the road together. And they can talk about their doubts about God, the existence of God. They can talk very basic kinds of things, or just simply share some of their the differences between a Missouri Synod Lutheran and a Roman Catholic and a disciple of Christ. And they suddenly realize that underneath the differences, they still all sought the same God. And it made it an exciting type of thing to see these young people grow in that and to find words for what was happening deep within.
Did you find, Joyce, that it was hard for them to talk about these things in the beginning, and how did you overcome that, if so?
Well, I think with young people you find they use humor a lot to deflect the serious reflection and the serious talk. And I think accepting that helped a lot. We also used a program which was process-oriented to build on first kind of allowing them to get to know each other as human persons. The program brought in the whole person, not just, it didn't isolate faith and spirituality. I think that's another important part of dealing with spirituality, is it involves our whole lives. That sometimes we talk about areas where we're wounded or broken, or areas where we're searching that don't seem to relate to God or faith, but they're a part of our whole search as a person. It's a holistic kind of thing. And this particular program did that in a process that had good group dynamics and good adult education process in it. They were treated as adults.
And sometimes you went away for weekend retreats, didn't you?
Yeah, we kind of set the stage for it,
yeah,
yes.
That makes a big difference, getting into a different setting, perhaps, and encouraging that kind of thing. Of course, the young people who joined up in this peer ministry program, with the idea of which I take it was to help to train them so that they could end up talking to other young people about their own faith, which strikes me as a really good idea in trying to develop one's own spirituality. I guess those of us who minister learn that really often the important points are in ministering to others, that we're drawn out of ourselves, that we see something new. I was doing some spiritual direction with a fellow priest the other day, and was talking to him afterwards about how much I got out of it. You know, he was thanking me for my time and so on, and I was saying, well, really, it's very beneficial for me. I mean, to hear you talk about your own spiritual journey is really challenging, and to see how seriously he took his own search in life was to maybe challenge my own seriousness and so on. So, and I played that back to him, saying that this is really important to me. You know, it's not just something I'm doing for you, but I feel like I benefit a lot from that. And I think that when I do counseling, spiritual direction of people, I almost always feel that way, challenged in a new way. So maybe this idea of peer ministry, of helping the young people to be more comfortable in sharing their faith with other people of their own age, and we're talking about collegians here, this program at least, is valuable. And they probably learn more doing it that way than if they just centered in on themselves.
They seem to. I think that it gives them a comfortableness, first with themselves, and I think a major comfortableness was that they are still searchers. And I think that's something I find also in counseling and spiritual direction with others, is that I'm still a searcher. And I fear the day that I find the answers, because I think I will have blocked myself in and lost what the whole spiritual life is about, which is an ongoing deepening. And I think to share my own search at times in situations has helped the people I'm dealing with, also knowing that we're all on the right road together in a way.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking that you used that word holistic before, and it's probably an important thing to get into this whole discussion of spirituality. That's an in word these days, but I think it does talk about something important, that we're treating the whole person in the spiritual life. It's vital to realize that includes the physical and the emotional and the intellectual side of ourselves. I remember one example of one woman who was trying to, I think the situation was she was trying to get more patient with her offspring and so on. And we were trying everything, and I had her say a prayer 3 times a day for this patience and so on. And we analyzed her emotions carefully to understand why she was doing so. This went on for months like this. And one week she came in and said, "Geez, it's going better, Father. I want to tell you it's been great. I've been really getting along better with the kids." And I says, "Yeah, what did you do?" And she said, "Well, I started jogging." Mm-hmm. And I think that the point of it was she had touched another dimension of her life, the physical, bodily side of it, and somehow gotten that in order. And I think because she was jogging, she was sleeping better, and she had more energy, was less fatigued, and because of that simple response, then she was able to deal better with her offspring, and she wasn't so on edge with them and was much more caring and understanding. And we had tried all these other ways, and she found it herself that way. It brings out this holistic side. Very often what's blocking our growth in the spiritual life is perhaps maybe we're not watching our diet well enough, or there's an emotion that we haven't learned to deal with. It's not simply a matter of reading the Bible more or participating better in the liturgy. There's more to it. We are whole creatures, have many dimensions, and we must attend to those. And that goes for the young people as well, and I think when they see that, that surely would help.
I know when in some of the collegians who come for spiritual direction, if they say, like God has seemed very distant, I just can't pray these days, usually I ask, well, what's happening? And if it's finals week or the week before finals week where they're staying up till 2, 3 in the morning to get a paper done, they're not eating well, a lot of that begins to play a part, and they become more comfortable with the fact that there are a lot of other things happening in their lives. Yeah. Relationships, how those are going, definitely affect it.
Exactly. You learn after years, if someone comes in and says they're not praying well or God is absent, that one of the first questions is, how's your social life going?
That helps,
because
yes.
there is such a correlation between the relationship questions with other human beings and our relationship with God, because that's how we form our understanding of the relationship with God. We find God in and through those various encounters with other people.
I think in dealing with like high school age youth, that's a very important thing to remember, that in their spirituality, that God and the God questions are not primary in their lives. They're dealing with identity questions of who they are. They're trying out different ways of being, and being with the relationships become very important. They need to impress the adults. They need to work well with their peers. They need to be accepted and belong. And so I think sometimes when we are so terribly concerned about what's happening to them spiritually, we lose sight of the fact that the important things in their lives are physical, how they look, or psychological, how they're accepted, how they belong, relational, who they're getting along with and who they're not getting along with.
And we have to affirm that, right? I mean, we have to allow those questions. If those are the real questions, then we have to be trying to deal with. By we, I mean parents, teachers, religious leaders, and so on. We have to be in tune with those questions. One of the things, questions would be, how, if we do take this seriously as parents or as spiritual guides and so on, how are we going to do it? What things should we keep in mind? And one would seem to me to be very patient with the young people, to accept the gradualness of growth. I like what you said earlier, that we're all searchers, and that you would rue the day when all the questions would be answered, because life would become dull and routine, and that we must celebrate that, especially in the young people. We can't expect them to have it all together right away, because we don't have it all together. And when we understand the commonness of the journey, perhaps we're going to do better. Perhaps especially important in the area of sexuality, and to realize that young people aren't going to solve all those problems quickly or easily, that experimentation seems to be an important part of life and of growth, and that we have to be patient with them in this search, and to realize, again, the great difficulties of achieving sexual integration.
It's almost more important to help them understand the questions before we even try to do anything about answering or responding to them. And I think the area of sexuality is a good one, to help them understand what's happening and who they are.
And the commonness of that, I know just so often yet, I mean, just to point out the commonness of the problem with masturbation is to free a lot of young people, because they think they're the only one with the problem. And that's easy to do, get isolated and zeroed in on that. And just when they often know the commonness of that problem, it seems to free them somehow and make it easier to make progress in dealing with it. So we need patience. You understand that we humans are not complete or total, that we are in process. Who am I? I don't know, because I'm not finished yet.
Yes.
is really a great line. But we have to communicate that to the young people, because their great problem is that they think that they got to be perfect now.
I think a patience with mistakes, and an understanding too that forgiveness is possible. Forgiveness of myself for what I feel I've done wrong, or places where I failed. As adults working with youth, I think helping them to understand forgiveness by our own sense of forgiveness, by our sense of allowing them to make the mistakes, is an important learning process. We don't have to set it up for them, but we can help them understand that it's okay to stumble and fall. We can always get up again.
It's one of the important parts of our Christian heritage to speak about a God who loves us and forgives us, and to be able to say that it is a God who wipes the slate clean and gives us another chance. He never imprisons us in our past, and He opens a future up to us that seems to be absolutely vital. And we've got something really important to tell the young people. We have to communicate that. Every time we get involved in this hellfire, brimstone, damnation, heavy moralism, I think we really make a mistake. I think parents really should not use that kind of thing to get their kids to do what they want them to do as they're growing up. We have to present a God of love who calls us forward. Not an easy God, I don't mean that, or a God who doesn't care about what we do. God who calls us to responsibility, but when we mess up somehow, when we sin and meet our limitations, that He's always there to heal and to comfort us. Got to tell that story of the prodigal son over and over, I think. That's key to our understanding of what our God is really like. Guilt is still a major problem for the young people, and then they get zeroed in on that guilt. They feel bad about themselves. They feel limitations, and that's why they often do these strange things. Not because they're feeling on top of it or want to be arrogant or all of that. I think a lot of that sullenness really grows out of a sense of limitation, of not feeling bad about their body, about themselves, about their emotional growth, as you said. And we have to be ready to say, no, that's all right. There's healing for that.
And not only preach the God who loves, but live that love ourselves so that they can touch it in a very human kind of way.
Yeah, we can misread, can't we, very often, young people, because we can think that they're being
out to get us somehow, or that, they have all the answers. That's really a big mistake. They don't have all the answers. They're searching. So one guy reviewing a movie recently said it was really refreshing to see the adolescent portrayed as one who didn't understand everything, who was out of it. I think we could celebrate the youth culture, give them too much credit in a way. We have to be patient with them. Well, Joyce, we've been talking about spirituality. There's 100 different things that we could say about it. We've really just zeroed in on a few. We've seen that we're embodied spirits, and we have to take a holistic approach to spirituality, and that especially for us adults, that we have to be patient with the growth of the young people. And to do that, we have to be in touch with ourselves, to know that we ourselves are pilgrims, and be willing to share a little bit of that with the young people. I think that encourages them and finally helps to give them hope.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister at the University of Toledo. Joining Father Bacik in this discussion was Sister Joyce Lehman, Director of Religious Education at St. Thomas More University Parish in Bowling Green. The topic of this week's Reflections was spirituality and youth ministry. If you have any questions about today's program or any ideas for topics you'd like to hear discussed, please write to Reflections in care of WLQR, Toledo, Ohio 43623. Produced in the studios of WLQR, Reflections is directed by Mary Beth Kirchner. Reflections is brought to you by the Genesis Radio Network.